Okay, we're at the bottom of Ayin Amud Aleph for 70A3, the last line over there. Baimine, so we're talking still the idea of the halacha of relinquishing rights. So Baimine Rava Merav Nachman Yoresh Mahu Shivato Rishus. What about an heir, someone who inherits from someone else? Are they allowed to relinquish rights? Okay, so halachically, person dies and their entire property. It's not like you have to give the property to the child. The child immediately inherits the property, right? That's just the way it works. Worth noting, once we're on the topic, if a person does not, in a situation where a person has, bottom line is a person should, when a person should have a will, first of all, a will, and make sure that the will is aligned with halacha, because there are scenarios, according to halacha, if let's say there's a son and a daughter, then or a bechor, like oldest son, it's not necessarily going to be divided the way a person wants, and it'd be highly recommended to divide things equally. It doesn't matter how much you like one of your sons or daughters, just to give things equally, and halachically, certain things may happen which do not necessarily reflect that, and so there are mechanisms in order to set up a will that will follow your wishes and will not violate halacha, because if you don't have such a will, it could get complicated. Okay, that's just a sidebar, but a person should A, have a will, it's a good thing to have, and B, make sure that it's being done according to halacha. Okay, so with that in mind, so in this case, let's just keep it simple. In this case, there's a person, he passed away, and he's in a courtyard, and he dies on Shabbos, and he was not mevatel rishus to his neighbors. So again, person's old, very, very old. They did not join the eruv with their neighbors. Okay, so you have a courtyard over here where there's a problem because this person did not join the eruv, and then they die on Shabbos, and the heir, the person who inherited, is now there on Shabbos. Now you turn to this person. Is this person who inherits, are they allowed to do bittul rishus? Are they allowed to relinquish their rights? Okay, so heicha, so 70b1. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara clarifies what the question is. Heicha di baila ruve me'atmal matim arev. Do we say that it's specifically in a situation where a person was able to join the eruv had they chosen to do so? In that case, vatule nami matim mevatel. Then they're allowed to do relinquishing. Aval hai, but in this case, kevan di baila ruve me'atma lo matima arev, since the inheritor was not able to join the eruv yesterday because he didn't own this house. In other words, the inheritor is someone who lives, 5 blocks away. They don't live here, but now in the middle of Shabbos, now they do live here, because now in the middle of Shabbos, the house becomes theirs. So they were unable, prior to Shabbos, when Shabbos began, they were unable to join the eruv because it wasn't their home. It's only in the middle of Shabbos that they're able to theoretically, only on Shabbos that they're now part of the property. So do we say that since before Shabbos they would not have been able to join the eruv, lo matim mevatel, therefore they're not able to relinquish their rights? O dilma, or do we say yoresh kare da'avua hi? Do we say that an inheritor is considered just an extension? Literally, kare means like the leg, is just an extension of his father. Okay, so you hear the question. In other words, the question is like this: do we say that again? Relinquishing is a leniency. So do we say that it's a leniency created by the rabbis, and do we say that relinquishing only works to someone who you could have theoretically joined the eruv before Shabbos, but you didn't, for whatever technical reason? So now on Shabbos you could do bittul. But if someone was not able, but that institution maybe only applies in that particular case. In a scenario like this one, where the child was unable to join the eruv before Shabbos because they didn't live there, they didn't own that house yet, it wasn't theirs. So before Shabbos they weren't able to join into an eruv, therefore bittul wouldn't work since they were never really connected to this courtyard, and therefore maybe not. Or do we say no? At the end of the day, granted they didn't live there, but we see the child as simply an extension of the father. The father was there, and therefore he's there as well, and therefore he's able to do bittul. That's the Gemara's question. Okay, Amrle.
He's not living in the house.
He's not living in the house. Correct. He's not living in the house. He's living. He's living 5 blocks away. Whatever. He has his own house, but now he inherits it. Now he has 2 houses, right? Because he just inherited his father's house. So Amrle, Rav Nachman says, Ani omer mevatel. I say that you are able to do bittul. V'hani devei Shmuel tanu ein mevatel. The students of Shmuel say that you cannot relinquish. Okay. And now the Gemara is going to ask a couple of questions on Rav Nachman, who says that you are allowed to do bittul. Okay. Meaning that this inheritor, this heir, is able to do bittul. Okay. Ase. We asked the question from the following brisa, and we're going to unpack the brisa. So Zeklal. So the brisa begins by saying this is the rule. Whenever a brisa says this is the rule, it's coming to say that whatever case we're about to tell you, it's broader than that. There's more things included. If I say this is a rule, then it's not just, if I say a following case, when X happens, then Y, then that's the case. But if I say this is the rule, when X happens, then Y, that means that I'm talking about not just X and Y, I'm talking about a broader rule. So whenever we see Zeh Klal, there's the rule, that means that it's going to be not just the case we're about to give, but also something else included in that. So we'll come back and we'll see what's included. So this is the rule. Kol shemutter l'miktzah Shabbos, a chater, a courtyard that was permitted for the first part of Shabbos, hutter l'chol ha-Shabbos, remains permitted for the entire Shabbos. V'chol sheneser, and we'll see what that means in a moment. V'chol sheneser l'miktzah Shabbos, and a chatzar which was restricted for the first part of Shabbos, neser l'kol ha-Shabbos, because is restricted for the entire Shabbos. Okay, chutz mimevata rishus, except for the case in which someone relinquishes their rights, where it is forbidden when Shabbos begins. Right, because when Shabbos begins, they did not make an eruv, and then in the middle of Shabbos, the person goes ahead and does bittul rishus, and gives over the property to everyone else, and therefore makes it permitted. Okay? So now we're going to unpack this entire brisa. So the first line, we're at the top of the second column in 70b1. Kol shehuter lemiktzah Shabbos, mutter lekol Shabbos. So what is the case where a courtyard was permitted for the first part of Shabbos and then remains permitted for the entire Shabbos? Kigon erav derech haPesach. Let's say you have two adjoining chatzeros, and they have an entrance between the two chatzeros. That's too far. Okay, but you see all the way over there. Yeah, you see the case of the two of them lined up. The bottom picture over there. Sorry for people who are watching a video. Got to be here in person. You see the two of them lined up side by side, right? So in that case, see there's a little doorway between them. You see the doorway between them? Yeah. So let's say that before Shabbos, there is an eruv between both these things. They made an eruv between all of them. Fantastic. And then on Shabbos, I don't know, there was a storm or it's a lousy structure, and the doorway between them breaks, and so basically like the stones fall in, and now it's closed off. There's no longer a door between them, right? Now they made, again, the reason they're able to make an error is because they have an opening between them, and they have an error between them, and therefore they're all considered one property, right? That's the idea of an error. The idea is you have the three houses, right? The three houses on the bottom and the two houses on the side. They made an error. They collected bread among all of them, or whatever it is. They kept it by one of their houses. Fantastic. But now the only reason they're able to carry between them, not just technically, but also halachically, is because there's a door there, which makes it that they're one place. But now the door breaks. The stones fall down, and they are now two separate places. Nonetheless, that's the case where it was allowed when Shabbos begins. You're allowed after the continuation of Shabbos. What that means is that you'd be allowed, right? So v'nistam Pesach, right? The entrance becomes sealed on Shabbos. Erev, or Erev derech chalon v'nistam chalom. Or they had a window, like a large window between the two courtyards, and then the window became sealed. So the halacha is that in that case, since it was permitted when Shabbos began, it's permitted even though it gets closed off, which is a required feature of making an eruv, is that there's passage between them, but even though it gets closed off, that doorway gets closed off, you're allowed to transfer between them. So if they want to go ahead and throw things over, two of the kids say, hey, let's have a catch over our two walls, or whatever. You say like, hey, you guys need some food or whatever it is, I'm going to throw the food over the thing, whatever. Bottom line is it's allowed. You're still allowed to carry between them, right? Or if you want to walk over the wall, I don't know, climb over the wall, all that is permitted, even though there's no doorway, which is usually, meaning, if there was always, before Shabbos began, there was no doorway between them, you can't make an eruv because you're not connected, right? So beginning of Shabbos, it was permitted, and then when Shabbos began, it was closed. Nonetheless, since it was permitted when Shabbos began, it's permitted throughout all of Shabbos. That's case number one. Okay? And what does Zeh HaKlal come to include in the next paragraph? Zeh HaKlal, when it says this is the principle, it's coming to include something bigger. This is a much more novel case. This is the principle is a case where, remember we haven't talked about a korah and a lechi in a long time, but if you have a courtyard, right, you have the pole on the side or the thing on the top, right, and that's what permits carrying within them, etc. So you don't go by mistake carry into the public domain. So let's say it was there, and then on Shabbos, some little boy decided he's going to start doing pull-ups on the korah. It happens. May have even happened in my house sometime soon. Oh, let's go a little while ago. Fine. So the bottom line is that they break it. They break it on Shabbos. Doesn't matter. You're allowed to carry, which is a very novel thing. The thing which reminds you not to carry, but since it was permitted before Shabbos, Zeh HaKlal, this is the rule to include all cases. Any case where it's permitted when Shabbos began, even though now the technical pieces which were needed to make it permitted are gone, no problem. It was permitted in the beginning of Shabbos, we permitted all the rest of Shabbos. Okay? That's rule number one. Let's go to the ones which are forbidden. Kol shenesar l'miktzah Shabbos, nesar l'kol Shabbos kula. Anything which is forbidden for part of Shabbos is forbidden for all of Shabbos. What's that about? Kigon shnei batim b'shnei tzidei rishus harabim. That's a case where there are two homes on two sides of the public domain. Okay, so v'kifum nachrim mechitza b'Shabbos, and non-Jews enclose them with partitions on Shabbos. Okay, so the case is the case is like this. We've had this case many times before. You have a public domain over here. I'm tired. Okay, what's it called? Okay, I'll be lazy. Okay, here we go. This one we own it, right? Got it. Okay. 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 Okay, so you have the case, we've seen this case many times before. You have a street, and you have a house over here, and a house over here, okay? And this public domain, public, over here. So there is absolutely no way that they're going to be able to carry there. The thing is, so when Shabbos begins, there's nothing allowing them to carry, and then on Shabbos, you have a bunch of non-Jews who stand there, and in doing so, they create a wall. They create a human, not a human shield, but a human wall. Those are people. They basically create a human wall. So if it was a single person, let's say a single person owned both these houses, then you would be able to carry because you don't need an Eruv over here, right? Because basically now human beings are able to create a wall. If human beings stand still, they create a wall. We saw that before with the bris milah, different case like that. So similarly over here, I know this is not fun. Bottom line is, right, you see this is a human wall. So if they're both owned by the same person, then you can start carrying things over here because a wall was created. But in a situation where it was owned, these are two people, so you created a human wall. So it was forbidden, when Shabbos began, these people were not standing here. It was forbidden for them to carry, obviously, right? Now on Shabbos, these people come along, and now they've made it into a private domain because there are walls. Nonetheless, even if one of them goes ahead and does bittul, let's say this guy relinquishes rights to this person, too bad. That's not going to be allowed. That's because it was forbidden when Shabbos began. It's going to be forbidden for all of Shabbos, right?
It's not because it's temporary.
Not because it's temporary, but because it started, because even though it's temporary, that's not meaning. Again, if it was an individual, if it was both those homes were owned by you, you own both those homes, right? One was your regular home, was your summer home across the street. So they're both owned by you, then it would be fine, even though it's temporary. It's because it was forbidden as meaning in the context of Eruv, meaning, but then it wouldn't be an Eruv issue. Then it would just be, is this a private domain? Is it not a private domain? Now there's a wall, it's a private domain, right? But in the context of making an Eruv, normally now once we have the wall, the fact that it's temporary is not the issue. The fact is that since it was forbidden when Shabbos began, so even if there's the two of us live in that courtyard, I could go and that's all my property to you, it doesn't work because it was forbidden when Shabbos began. It's forbidden for all of Shabbos. Okay, so again, so let's just read that. If it was restricted for the first part of Shabbos, it's restricted for the entire Shabbos. Two homes on two sides of a public domain. And non-Jews enclose them with partitions on Shabbos. Although, right, there's no biblical prohibition anymore because it's a private domain. Nonetheless, you are not allowed to even do bittul in that case, and that is what the Gemara was teaching. Again, now zehaklal, the idea of this is the rule, lasuyemai, right? The Brisa begins with this. These are the rules, implying that whatever principle is laid out, there is something broader. So what's that coming to include? Lasuyem meis nachri b'Shabbos to include a courtyard in which a non-Jew dies on Shabbos. So meaning, let's say you had a courtyard. So there's two of us living in a courtyard, and there's a non-Jew. Okay, so in that case, it would be usher if the non-Jew did not do relinquishing, and so it's usher when Shabbos began, and then he dies. So even though he's no longer here, okay, and they take him out, whatever, he's no longer here, he's no longer living there. So the whole reason for the rabbis to institute the prohibition shouldn't exist. Nonetheless, since when Shabbos began it was usher, and he never rented us his space, therefore it's going to be usher for all of Shabbos. Okay, we finished explaining the entire brisa, except for the last line, and the last line is the one that's going to be the question on Rav Nachman. Again, what was Rav Nachman and Vei Shmuel arguing about? They're arguing about a scenario where a person inherits a home on Shabbos. Are they able to relinquish the rights on if they inherit the courtyard, the rights to the courtyard on Shabbos? Are they able to do bittul rishus? So the last line of the brisa said, "Tani chutz mi mevatel rishus." The brisa said that a chutzner which was restricted for part of Shabbos usually is restricted for all of Shabbos, like this case, or like the case where the non-Jew dies, except for the case of a person who relinquishes their rights. That's the only exception. The only exception is that if we, the three of us over here, or whatever, all of us over here have a courtyard, and one of us didn't join the Eruv, so that means it's usher when Shabbos begins. Nonetheless, for mevatel rishus, for the person who goes ahead and does bittul rishus, even though it's usher when Shabbos began, there is this loophole that's only the case of bittul rishus. But the Brisa, we infer ihu in yorish lo. If it says this is the exception, that means that it's only the individual who is living there who did not join. That person's able to do bittul, but not a case of a yorish, not the case of an inheritor. In other words, the fact that it said this is the exception implies that there's only one case which is an exception where the courtyard is usher when Shabbos begins and is now going to be permitted sometime during Shabbos. What's the one case? The one case is where there's a person who is living there, did not do bittul, and now middle of Shabbos does bittul. What about the case of a yoresh, of an inheritor? There's one exception. It didn't say two exceptions. So the Gemara says, no. That's not a question. The Gemara says, Ema chutz mitoras bittul rishus. It didn't mean literally the individual who is living there and now is mevatzah rishus. It just means except for the whole concept of bittul rishus. In other words, by saying the whole concept of bittul rishus, it's a much broader statement. It's coming to exclude. It's saying that, yes, most cases where it's forbidden when Shabbos begins, it's going to be forbidden for all of Shabbos, okay? Except for the whole concept of bittul rishus. What do you mean the concept of Rishus? Meaning, whether it's I was living there and I forgot to do it, or it's a scenario where there's someone who was living there, then died, and their child inherited it, and now they're going to do it. But the point is that the exception, meaning the allowance, is for all cases of Bittul Rishus, that even though it's Asur when Shabbos began, Bittul still applies. But it's not coming to exclude the inheritor, it's coming to say that the only case which is an exclusion are all cases of Bittul Rishus. Yes?
Sorry, sometimes go Hebrew words. So that thing there, that's not Bittul Rishus. That's just
it would have been it is, but there's like another factor over there.
Okay, so it's like okay.
Because you're right. The two people, the only way it's going to begin to work, I mean, they did make an Eruv. It's clearly only going to work if one does bittul rishus, relinquishing of rights, but it's the fact that there also wasn't a courtyard until the people stood there. So it's like
right, and they couldn't have done it before Shabbos.
Correct.
Because that one
Exactly. Okay, so therefore the Gemara drops off, no question on Rav Nachman. Question number 2 on Rav Nachman from another brayso. Eisvei, Echam minei chatzar shemes. One of the members of the courtyard dies. V'niach reshusa le'echam meshuk, and he bequeath. Okay, that's a word you never use in normal sentences. He gives over, he in his will, he gave his property to someone from the marketplace. By saying someone from the marketplace, he means someone who doesn't live in the courtyard, right? So, Reuven is living in the courtyard, and in his will, he gives us his house to Shimon. Shimon does not live in that courtyard, okay? If he died before Shabbos, then the individual, who lives, Shimon, who lives outside, who didn't join in the Eruv, he's not going to cause if it happened before Shabbos, then so what happens? Let's say on Friday Reuven dies. He gives his property now belongs to Shimon, right? And Shimon has a home now in that property, and which he has like access to, which he's able to use, and he didn't join in the Eruv. That means the courtyard is going to be Aser, because there's a member of the courtyard, even though he's not living there, but there's a member of the courtyard who did not join in the Eruv, right? So again, Reuven is, and I know this is different. Until now, we've kind of assumed that if you're not home, you don't have to join the Eruv. We'll see soon. This is going with the view that says as long as you have usage or possible usage in the courtyard, then you will prohibit the Eruv, which causes a lot of problems. A person's like traveling, wherever it is. But the bottom line is that we're talking about a case where again, there's Reuven in the courtyard. Reuven dies before Shabbos, leaves it over to Shimon. Shimon doesn't live there, so you never join the Eruv. And Shabbos now begins, so it's Aser, because Shimon has a access to that house, which he now inherited, and he never joined the Eruv. Okay? However, if he died after Shabbos began, then he does not restrict the Chatzar. Why? Because Reuven already joined in the Eruv, and so Reuven, who is part of the Eruv, dies in the middle of Shabbos. Okay, so now Shimon, meaning it's a little bit novel, right? Because Reuven joined in the Eruv, and then Reuven dies on Shabbos, right? So now Shimon is the one who now officially lives there because Reuven died. Doesn't matter, since Reuven already joined in the Eruv, since it was already permitted for everyone to carry, we allow everyone to continue carrying on Shabbos. Yes?
I just feel like this is a new thing that, like the whole thing is that you didn't join the Eruv, but you live there, and then you can do, so it just feels like, how is that?
Right.
This thing that
so even though he doesn't, right. So the Gemara is going to elaborate this in a little bit, and as I said, I alluded to very, very briefly, but basically over here, since Shimon has some access to it and can use it for some reasons, even though he doesn't live there.
The case with all, like a lot of the people that aren't there and then do the bittul reshus.
So,
like if you and Max came there,
correct. So until now we've been assuming correct. These brises are going with the assumption that which is not agreed upon by all, right? And therefore I was explaining everything in a more simple fashion until now. That which is one opinion, which basically as long as I'm not there on Shabbos, I have enough. It's no one's problem. But this brise is assuming that as long as a person has access and functionality in the brisa, then they're going to be included in that.
They're adding this after all those discussions.
After all those discussions, yes. So you get your money back. Okay, but the bottom line is that yes, 100%. This is a novel piece of information that's being introduced. Okay, fair. Let's say the opposite. Let's say you have someone who does not live in a courtyard. Okay, Shimon is the one who does not live here, and what happens is he is. Okay, like this. The person does not live in the courtyard, but owns a home there. Okay, and then he dies, and he gives his house to someone in the courtyard. Okay, to one of the members who's already living in the courtyard. So again, the case is like Shimon, who doesn't live in the courtyard but has a house in the courtyard, so he keeps like his stuff in there. It's a storage house for him, and he dies, and he gives his home to Levi, who already lives in the courtyard. You with me in the case? Okay. So mibodium in oser. If it happens while it's still day, then it doesn't restrict it because the person is already living there. Levi's living in the courtyard, so he's going to join in the Erev. If he dies afterwards, then he restricts it. Okay, then he restricts it because he couldn't have joined in the Erev because we didn't assume that he was going to have to, although he doesn't have any reason to assume that he had to join in an Erev over there because he didn't really own. He didn't. I want to say this right. He had his own house. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. 1 second. Just want to make sure I have the case right. I don't think I have the case right. 1 second. Right. So what's the case? The person lives there. Okay. Person who lives there but doesn't. I believe. Sorry. The case is like this. The case is that the person does not have. He's giving it to someone who is living there. Let's say like this. Let's say Levi is living in Ruvain's house. Okay. Reuven's house. Levi's living in Reuven's house, okay? Levi does not own the house, right? So if Reuven gives over his house to Levi while it's still Shabbat, right? So meaning I allow Levi to live in my house, whatever. Reuven lives somewhere else, but Reuven has a house in a courtyard. He lets Levi live there. So really, as long as Levi's living there, Reuven's still the owner, and Reuven is the one who has to join in the Erev, right? So if the person goes ahead and dies, if Reuven dies before Shabbos and he gives it to Levi, then Levi is able to just go ahead and join in the Erev because now not only does he live there, but he's now the owner. But if he dies after Shabbos begins, then he was living there, but he wasn't an owner, and therefore no bittul took place. Ask the Gemara, my oser, but why does he restrict it? Nevatel, let him do relinquishing of rights, right? So what does this imply? This implies that if it was not going to work before Shabbos begins, then it's not going to work. If it's usher for part of Shabbos, then it's going to be usher for the rest of Shabbos, right? This would again be a disproof to Rav Nachman. The Gemara says, no, my oser namli tani. What does the Brisa mean when it says that if Reuven died, then Levi restricts it? Doesn't mean he restricts it entirely the entire of Shabbos. It means he restricts it. But if he does bittul, it won't be restricted. In other words, you wanted to say the question, the implication of the brisa was that since Levi and Reuven never joined in the Erev, and now Levi's sitting there in the or let's say even Reuven joined in the Erev, and now Reuven's gone, and now Levi's living there, and so we say, oh, Levi, you never joined in the Erev, and therefore it should all be usher. It says it's usher, so it sounds like it's usher for all of Shabbos. That's a question of Nachman because now it's usher for part of Shabbos, implying that therefore because now Levi's living there and Levi never joined in the Erev, right? Because Reuven died, Levi's the one living there now. Levi never joined the Erev. The implication is it's usher for all Shabbos, right? The Gemara says no, it doesn't mean it was usher for all Shabbos. It means it was usher until bittul took place. Then it would be allowed. Okay, so basically, again, there's no question on Nachman. We're still not finished the discussion. We're going to pick up on this discussion a little bit more about, again, the question of a situation where it is forbidden, the courtyard is forbidden for part of Shabbos. Can you go ahead and allow it to be, if there's a way of getting around the prohibition on Shabbos, will that work? Or do we say once it's forbidden for part of Shabbos, it's going to be also for all of Shabbos? We will pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.